Few places in history matched the sheer brutality of Buchenwald. Perched on a wooded hill near Weimar, it was a place where suffering was relentless, where prisoners wasted away from starvation, exhaustion, and disease under the watchful eyes of the SS guards. For many, survival was impossible, as death lurked around every corner. Executions were routine, their efficiency perfected. Among the camp's many horrors was an execution method so cold, so calculated, that victims never saw it coming. In a small, unassuming room, hundreds were led to their deaths with quiet precision, another cruel innovation of a system built on cruelty. Welcome to the infamous past, where we uncover the grim history of Buchenwald, a place where suffering knew no limits and where the true depths of human cruelty were laid bare. Buchenwald. Buchenwald was a name that carried the weight of death. Situated outside the city of Weimar, it was one of the largest concentration camps within Nazi Germany, and tens of thousands perished within its barbed wire fences. When prisoners arrived, they were stripped of their names, reduced to numbers. They worked to the brink of death, starved to skeletons, and beaten for the smallest infractions. Disease spread through the barracks like wildfire. The weak, the sick, the unwanted were dragged away to be shot, hanged, or sent to the crematorium. SS guards killed with impunity, sometimes for work and sometimes for leisure. Survival at Buchenwald was a cruel lottery, dictated by the whims of those in power. Buchenwald was also a place of twisted science. Nazi doctors conducted experiments on live prisoners, injecting them with deadly diseases, exposing them to lethal conditions, all in the name of medical advancement. Those selected rarely lived long enough to see the next day. To the SS, they were not people, only test subjects. And then there was the Genickschussanlage, the killing room. Victims led inside never walked out. One moment they were standing, the next they were crumpled on the floor, dead. Genickschussanlage. The Genickschussanlage, German for neck shooting facility, was execution in the form of an illusion, a small, unassuming room designed not to raise alarm, but to deceive. To its victims, it appeared to be nothing more than a simple medical examination station. A measuring device stood against the wall, a routine feature in any clinic. Prisoners were told they would have their height recorded before transfer. They obeyed, standing straight, unaware of what was to come. Hidden behind the wall, an SS officer waited. A small slit in the wood concealed a pistol. With the pull of a trigger, a single bullet was fired into the back of the prisoner's neck, and death was near instantaneous. No struggle, no screams, no need for restraint. The body fell, dead before it even hit the floor. The bodies were dragged away, clearing the space for the next in line. The process repeated again and again. Unlike mass shootings, there were no chaotic scenes, no blood-stained courtyards, no disobedience, just a quiet, systematic removal of life, all orchestrated by Kommando 99. Kommando 99. Kommando 99 was a dedicated execution squad that operated exclusively within the walls of Buchenwald. The name itself came from a telephone number, 99, the telephone extension of a former horse stable repurposed as the home of the Genickschussanlage. Here, members of Kommando 99, drawn from Buchenwald's SS staff company, carried out cold, methodical killings. Their primary victims were Soviet prisoners of war, specifically Jews, Red Army commissars, and intellectuals. Each had been pre-selected in POW camps, marked for death under Hitler's commissar orders, a policy that flouted international law and condemned thousands without trial. Because they had been pre-selected for execution, their arrivals and deaths at Buchenwald were not reliably recorded. Over 4 years, Kommando 99 executed at least 8,000 1,000 Soviet POWs in this way. But the cold and calculated Genickschussanlage was not their only method. From 1943, the squad moved onto even more brutal methods, carrying out executions via strangulation in the basement of Buchenwald's crematorium. Special wall hooks were installed, from which a noose could be suspended and the victim choked to death. Victims were hanged in the morgue, their bodies later incinerated in the roaring furnaces above. Wilhelm Schäfer. One of Kommando 99's most senior members was Wilhelm Schäfer, a man whose career was built on blood. Rising through the SS ranks, he first served at Lichtenberg concentration camp until eventually moving to Buchenwald, where he became Hauptstarführer, playing a central role in the camp's efficient machinery of death. From 1937 to 1943, Schäfer was the key enforcer of Nazi brutality at Buchenwald, overseeing executions, torture, and mass killings. His victims were countless, too copious to number. He was actively involved in the torture of his prisoners, many of whom were left hanging by their wrists from trees for prolonged periods of time. He was also a constant spectator at and participant in floggings and interrogations. Inmates who became too weak to work were sent to the Sonnenstein killing facility, where they were executed with carbon monoxide. He thrived amongst the ruthless order of Buchenwald, where life was reduced to numbers and death was measured in efficiency. His loyalty to the Nazi cause was unwavering, his work driven by pure enthusiasm and dedication to the Nazi cause. He was one of the men who ensured that Buchenwald ran like a well-oiled machine, that suffering never ceased, and that the bodies never stopped piling up. By the time he left Buchenwald in 1943, Schäfer had helped transform the camp into one of the deadliest in Nazi Germany. His crimes were written in the ashes of the crematorium, the mass graves in the forest, and the thousands who never walked free or whose bodies were never found. Liberation of Buchenwald and justice. In April 1945, the brutality of Buchenwald would finally come to an end. As American soldiers advanced on the camp, SS guards scrambled to cover their crimes, fearing retribution. Large numbers of prisoners were marched out of the camp on foot. But the horrors of Buchenwald could not be so easily erased. Inside, an underground organization had learned of the Americans' impending arrival and began armed resistance. Prior to the Americans' impending arrival, the Gestapo planned to bomb the camp to the ground. But upon ringing the camp to tell them of the plan, the phone was answered by a prisoner, as most of the German forces had fled. The Americans entered the camp on the 12th of April. What the soldiers found defied belief. Thousands of starving, skeletal survivors stood behind the barbed wire, their bodies wasted to skin and bone by starvation and disease. Some attempted to lift their liberators into the air, but were too weak. The crematoriums were piled with ashes, while corpses lay stacked nearby. When it became obvious that the war had been lost, Schäfer cut his SS tattoo from his flesh and fled to live in a small town in Thuringia. Schäfer's new home was in the region of what would soon become East Germany, and after rising pressures from the Soviet-aligned government for the locals to collectivize their farms, Schäfer was visited by a representative who happened to be a survivor of Buchenwald. He recognized Schäfer, who was then arrested by the Stasi. He was sentenced to death and executed via guillotine on the 16th of June, 1961. Wolfgang Otto, the accused leader of Kommando 99, would be sentenced to 20 years in prison. His sentence was quickly reduced to 10 years, and he was released in 1953 due to good behavior. However, the sentencing of those responsible could never undo the suffering, but it did ensure that the world could see the bloody crimes of Buchenwald and identify those who had committed them. Buchenwald was just one of nearly 40 concentration camps spread across Nazi-controlled Europe, each a cog in a vast system of industrialized brutality. From Auschwitz to Treblinka, Ravensbrück to Dachau, the horrors were not isolated. Across occupied lands, millions were imprisoned, tortured, and murdered under the Reich's rule. And yet, this ordeal is not just history. Survivors remain, their bodies scarred, their memories unshaken. Their stories remind us that the horrors of the past are not so distant, and that the fight against hatred and cruelty is never truly over.